Hey everyone, this is Lori Barnes from Kepler College. I am really excited to host this video today. We are here with Cindy McKean and Carol Tebbs. So Carol is our director of the prediction certificate. She's our resident rectification expert. She's written a book on rectification, and Carol is going to share some of the techniques for rectifying a chart today. Cindy is our AstroMapping expert. She teaches a number of courses in that certificate and helps develop it. I'm really excited to hear what they have to share with us today. I do marketing for Kepler College, and I am also a graduate in the astromapping certificate. So I'm extra interested to hear about how astromapping meets rectification and how we can look at somebody's chart that doesn't have a verified birth time. Today, we are talking about the fabulous, magnificent, extremely talented Taylor Swift, hence the red lipstick, in honor of Taylor and her favorite color, red. So we're going to go ahead and start our slideshow and get into the presentation. Thanks for joining us today.
The mystery of Taylor Swift's birth time. What you'd find lately with celebrities is they tend to hide their birth time. And Taylor Swift is one of those people. And it has been rectified by somebody else as being 5:17 a.m. At least we have her date of birth, her year of birth, right? And her place of birth, but we don't have the exact time. So the goal when we got together and tried to determine what her birth time really could be is to mix different techniques. So one is using rectification, and Carol Tebbs is an absolute expert on that. She even wrote a book. She teaches classes at Kepler College. I highly recommend that you take them. It's a lot of insight. And then we try to match those findings up with Taylor's astromap. So we do the rectification first, and then we do the astromaps, and we tweak the astromap lines from there. And then we look at her experiences with the timing and the places, hence the rectification and the astromaps, and that equals a more likely birth time. So step one, rectification. Step two, tweaking the maps, and then cross-checking back and forth. So it's quite a long process. So when we set up this task, it was an idea that Lori and I had. It just came up out of nowhere. And we're like, let's get in touch with Carol. And Carol so graciously decided that she was going to join us with this. And this took, I think, several hours, because if we're looking at the time that we used on our own, plus we had the time that we met like 3 or 4 times before we could actually put this whole thing together. And Lori Barnes is a huge fan. Maybe she could even call herself a Swiftie. But she provided this whole portfolio with a timeline and a list of favorite places. And she really brought the love into it, because she really does love Taylor Swift. Carol and I we worked back and forth tweaking this. And then we just checked back in with Lori and double checked and just trying to verify information to see if it's true or not. We have challenges though. So it does help if you are a big fan oftentimes, because you'll know most information offhand without always having to look it up. But really, in rectification, and I'll let Carol speak to that, but astromapping, one of the biggest things is, yes, Taylor is a well-known celebrity, but truth is she's a stranger to us. Like, we don't personally know her. She's not on the phone with us giving us feedback. And when we're doing astromapping or rectification in general, it's really important to have a dialogue going on with your client. Carol, what do you have to say about that for rectification?
Absolutely. You need a full biography and a long list of major life events from childhood to the current time. And so you need feedback from a client. So dealing with celebrities is very difficult. People who are not giving us information. We need feedback from the client. Very important, with full biography and a long list of events. Without that interaction, dealing with especially famous people, they're not going to respond to us. So clearly, they're more difficult.
We would love, love, love to talk to Taylor about her time of birth and sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. So open invitation, Taylor, if you or your people are watching, we have some very experienced and professional astrologers at Kepler College that would be happy to keep your information private if you wanted to talk to an astrologer.
One of the things too, and this does happen with rectification and astromapping with feedback. So I could talk from the astromapping point of view of, the famous Pluto line and how tough it tends to be, that astrologers tend to universally agree that Pluto is going to be a tough line. Well, maybe on her Pluto line, she got ripped off financially, or maybe she experienced some kind of someone overpowering her in a very unpleasant way. And Taylor Swift has a rather wholesome kind of brand or image that comes with her. She's a very attractive, beautiful female, but she has this girl next door type of quality to her. Maybe part of her brand or image is not to share if something so horrible like that happened in her life and spread it. So, she'll keep it to herself. But if this was her talking to us back and forth as a client, and we said, hey, I could look at her Pluto line, say over Maine, and say, did such and such happen to you? Or have you experienced some kind of power play or whatever? And she would disclose that, of course, in all privacy. But with these public figures, that would not happen because they have an image to keep. So is that the same for you, Carol?
Absolutely. And that's why the famous people are difficult to rectify.
But we're doing our best here. And this is our disclaimer essentially, is knowing what we know as a team. This is the best time that we are coming up with. And like I said, we start with rectification. So back to you, Carol.
Taylor Swift, born December 13th, 1989, in Reading, Pennsylvania. Now, I know some people think Wyoming was where she was born, but she was born in Reading, and the family moved to Wyoming in age 3 for Taylor. But the birth time in Astro.com has 4 different birth times, and they range the whole 24 hours. So, absolutely, I have to start with a 24-hour search, which is really trying to find a needle in a big haystack. Basically, the ascendant sign for Taylor could be any one of 12 different signs. Certainly, it's extremely time consuming, but it's worthwhile to many clients who don't have birth time. Around the world, birth time is not regularly confirmed or written down. So here are the times that we have: 7:15 a.m. and a couple of different places said that. Even though they've said it a couple of times by different people, doesn't mean that it's correct. A Facebook entry on her fan page says Taylor Allison Swift was born at 8:36 a.m. in the Civic Hospital in Wyoming. Well, she was in Wyoming when she turned 3. However, the French website claimed to have 8:46 p.m. Now that's a huge range. So 5:17 looks great, but I have to do a 24-hour search. So when you don't have birth time, you don't have angles or houses. You don't have that information to put the planets in the right place until you have a birth time. So any astrologer out there who is seeing clients will face somebody who needs, and say, well, I know it was in the afternoon, it was after lunch, but I don't know the time. Yeah, rectification. So here's where I start. The first task is to narrow the time range as best you can. And the first thing to do is look at the moon. and look at the moon and see during 24 hours what span that will be, because the moon moves from 11 to 15 degrees a day. And very often the moon straddles two different signs. And so knowing the biography and knowing a client is going to give feedback, I can talk to the client about, well, gee, the Cancer, the emotional moon, the emotional part of their life. Cancer, family oriented and strong but giving. But Gemini was earlier. And so, well, does that Gemini fit? Well, you think with Taylor, oh, both could fit. Taylor's not going to answer my question. So in Taylor's chart, starting from midnight of December 13th, 1989, was 2817 Gemini. And by midnight or the end of the 24-hour day of December 13, the moon was at 1242 Cancer. So if I had feedback from her, it would be easier. In looking at her biography, and Lori, thank you, gave us a wonderful biography of Taylor Swift with specific dates on events and everything. Based upon derived information, not direct from Taylor, I chose Cancer. There are several reasons for that choice. Even though she's multitasking and doing a lot of things Gemini like, and at her age 35, she calls her mother every single day. I have Cancer moon. I don't never talk to my mother every day. And the family is very strong in her history. That's her solid base. And so I chose Cancer. It was a choice as a rectification without information coming from Taylor directly. So what I did now, I lopped off the hours that had Gemini moon. Now the next thing is what possible rising signs could happen. 2.5 hours off of 24 really isn't much. So I have a lot more work to do. I use a lot of 4 different techniques basically, and then I locked up with Cindy here, and she has another technique. I said, no, that's just one more technique, Cindy, that we're going to combine together to have more information to derive the correct birth time. So that said, I think we're going to mention at some point, but she has several, the moon and Mercury out of bounds, which is by declination north-south measurement, which means that they are independent. They're not ruled by what everybody else thinks. They seem to be on a path of their own choosing. But looking at the possible ascendant sign now, I'm looking at the descriptors. She's friendly and articulate. She's creative, hard worker, very close family, and very supportive family, by the way. Brother even is supportive. She plays guitar, banjo, ukulele, piano. She's multitasking. Basically, she's talent galore, and certainly a vocalist, pop, rock. She's started with country. And here now, in adulthood, she's a billionaire. 14 Grammys, top in her field. So there's so many things to look for. I have to do some testing. I'm leaning toward, at this point, a mutable ascendant, Gemini, Virgo, Sag, or Pisces. I'm not giving for certain yet. It's my hunch. Now I go to first, use software. Secondly, be cautious. If you are a trained astrologer, your judgment call is better than any software. So don't let that software wag the dog. I start out by testing hard events. They're easier to hook onto. And the reason hard events are easier to hook into is it's not something that they made a choice for. If you decide to get married, you plan the date and all of the accoutrements and so forth. You plan that. The hard events are, I broke a leg and I had surgery on X day, the specific date. Those things are easier to hook into for the first search. And we're looking for 360 degrees. We're trying to find the angles. We have the planets. We even have the nodes. Everything's there. But where do we put them in the wheel? So I use two software programs, and they're two extreme different ways of looking at the chart. Jigsaw on 360 degrees, when I enter all of the events and the specific day, month, and year, it calculates when that event hits a degree. And the more hits to certain degrees, that brings forth the birth time. On the other hand, I use Sirius 4.1. And within that, it's a very full software. It has a rectification module in it. But in Sirius, made by David Cochran, they're using astrological descriptors. So if you're talking about romance, the moon and Venus are involved. And so I put in the same events, the same 43 events in Jigsaw, that test, and then the same 43 events in Sirius. And I compare, and I'm looking for, in those good software things, do they come up with any date or time that is the same? And so clearly, I do ask the client to provide not only the events, but evaluate them. How much impact was that event in your life? 5 to least. No big deal. So that helps me judge where I put my focus. The events are simply day, month, and year. You will find a lot of clients, especially my age, say, yeah, I know the month and the year. Gosh, I can't remember the date. Okay, I can deal with that. Certainly, it's much better to get the information the day, month, and year of the event. I click on transits to the natal chart, day for a year, that's secondary progressions. I do day for a month, which is tertiary progressions. I do solar arc directions. Those are the four I like to use. But you can see there are lots of things I could click on. It's simply a choice. The more things you put in, the longer the list of things you have to test. Don't go overboard. You can get down the rabbit hole and not get out. And here you can see that I started at 0 a.m. and went to 24 hours to 12 a.m. again in 24 hours. And I chose every 4 minutes of clock time because 4 minutes of clock time is equal to 1 degree on the angles. The angles go all the way around every single day. And here I list the events. In this software, ask you whether it's a success, benefit, if there's a death in the family. There's about 12 different things you can choose. You can create your own even. Nonetheless, what the scores are showing me, the first one I got from Sirius was 6 a.m., 6:56 a.m. Okay. The second choice in line was 11:52 a.m. But anyway, it gives scores, and I enlarged some of them so that we could see. But notice that 5:17 a.m. is not on the list anywhere near the top, nor was 8:36 a.m., nor was 8:46 p.m. It's like 5 pages of stuff. And so here's what Jigsaw put out. It likes 11:52 a.m., but it liked 2:14 a.m. It liked 4:51 a.m. So in other words, I pick what is common to the two. That doesn't mean it's perfect. It just means that's a starting point. So now I'm testing the Sirius time, and I'm just testing one event because we don't want to go way over. This could take hours. I'm just going to give a short information here. The date of one of her awards, wonderful award that she earned, Kanye West absolutely was a jerk. He ruined Taylor's award ceremony by saying, no, Beyonce should have this. And that was her first run. And I'm sure she was hurt. But I'm looking at this chart and I'm trying to see, okay, in the outer wheel is the movement, and this is solar arc direction around the outer wheel. The natal wheel for 6:56 a.m. is on the inside. Yes, solar arc direction Mars has moved to the ascendant. Okay, that's not enough to totally upset anything. Okay, it's not as hurtful as what that event was for her. Here's the ascendant of the sun. The ascendant hasn't touched Mercury. It's past Uranus, so it's already shot its wad. But here's the sun on Neptune. Okay, that would be good for the award and her dream coming true. But as an astrologer, I'm saying that's not enough. Now in 11:52 a.m., the natal chart now has that sun right on the midheaven. Oh, does that fit? And for this same difficult event, lots of wonderful aspects there. Here's the midheaven conjunct Neptune, in fact, right at the midpoint between Mercury and Neptune. Her dreams come true. And yet at the same time, here's the sun. And when I have a double wheel, it's hard to put the minutes in, but it's within a minute and a half of conjunct Saturn, which describes to me Kanye West bumping in there on the same day. So certainly I test all of the other things. So certainly I tested it with transits. I tested with solar arc directions, as I just showed, secondary progressions and tertiary progressions. But in any of those events, there's no activation at all for 5:17 a.m. and very little information on the other 8:36 time and the 8:46 p.m. On that day, Saturn squaring Sun all day long, transit. So there is some tensity and things that could go wrong. With birth time, though, we now have angles and houses. You can even have the sect, it's a day chart. You can have rulers, dispositors, and all more. And see how happy Taylor is? I think I have a couple more slides to close it up. But basically, we're working with a derived birth time. This is solar arc directions. So this is secondary progression, just to go through the 4 techniques that I use. And then I'm going to turn it over to Cindy to add a 5th one, mapping. So at 11:52 a.m., secondary progressions have, certainly the midheaven is always going to be the same and as the sun as before. But you have certain other planets, the nodes coming across, because the new nodes move so very slowly by secondary progression. So you, as astrologers, you have to know what moves, how fast, and how long it's going to stay in a 1-degree orb. That's the important thing. Once it's beyond that 1 degree, it's shot its wad, it's moving on. I could clearly see here's the moon being activated, sextile there from Saturn. I needed to make my wheels a little bit larger. But that said, the secondary progression doesn't give me as much information. However, the test goes on. So let's go to the next slide. This is the tertiary progressions, which is the secondary progression moving very, very fast. And in this, you can see here's Uranus that has moved now at a midpoint between Mercury and Uranus. Clearly, you have Venus activated by Mars. Mars is trining Venus. And again, the 11th house, the population, her friends, all of her friends through music. And indeed, here's the sun moving within 1 degree to the 7th house. That's relationships, but it's also her public as well. So 11th house, 7th house is hit. So there are many descriptors there that fit. And here's the ascendant. The secondary progressed ascendant is 1 degree right on Mars. That could be some action that is probably out of place, could easily describe Kanye West's outburst in the middle of her acceptance speech. And the ascendant is her. That's her helmsman right there. And Mars is active and it's in Scorpio, and sometimes it's not real nice in Scorpio. So that said, it's working without spending a lot of time. This is the last one of mine. However, you can see what's activating. And certainly here's Jupiter right on her north node. That fits. I mean, it's the wonderful day of her life. It's her first award. Here's Jupiter trying the ascendant. It's applying. It's not there totally, but it's applying. So that's good. And Jupiter is certainly, the Mars here is making a trine to the Pluto. I don't know whether that describes what Kanye got away with. She should have done a slap on the face like the other actor did. So basically, you trained astrologers, you need to know rectification because you will have clients who do not have a clear birth time, a rounded off birth time, maybe, and some of them around the world do not have birth time at all. But what I say is this: you are the astrologer, you make the decision, you help that client. And if a document shows up afterwards, I have found I've done lots of rectification. Most of the time, I'm within minutes of whatever that document turned up. Trust your astrological knowledge, it's critical. So thank you. And I'm going to pass this off to Cindy because she has a fifth proof that we're close to this birth time.
Thank you, Carol. So I tend to, my specialty, my expertise is astromapping. I think happens in rectification too, but sometimes I could see something in astromapping where I'll be like, oh, did you experience such and such at such a place? And the person's like, no, that didn't happen. But then like 2 or 3 days later, they're like, I happened to be at that city and this is what happened to me. So I think in rectification, that might happen as well, where a major event happened in their life and they had so much life they forgot until like it just hits them, maybe even a week later. With Taylor's chart here, I'm going to show you a couple different times, but I'm really going to focus on the 11:52 a.m. chart since that's what rectification came up with. And if we're looking at Taylor Swift's chart, we could see that the sun on the midheaven angle is profound. That's when the sun is shining down on you. Now, she's a mid-December baby. So with that, we know that the sun was getting less and less. There's less and less light. What that means is it's precious light. It's precious sun in some ways. It's not as strong as you would get on the summer solstice, where the sun would be higher up in the sky and therefore have a bigger width or a bigger span of its orb, but also of the power of the sun. But nonetheless, it's the sun. It's the primary luminary in our sky. It defines the ecliptic. It defines the solar plane. So that's something we want to see, especially if she's born under that line. The sun is shining on her. I use Koch systems when I'm doing relocation charts. And we could see that in the Koch system, Jupiter and Moon are in her fourth house. And that to me kind of indicates more of that closeness that she has with her family, in particular her mother, but also the support that she would have from them as well. I also add the vertex in the chart sometimes because the vertex is a crossing point between two different coordinate systems. And if we look at that in astromapping, we could say that is something to do with portals or things where opportunities could come up in one's life at those locations. If we look at the chart on the left, on the right that shows declination, we could see that the moon, Mercury, and Uranus are out of bounds. They're not on the solar plane. They kind of could work more independently and according to their own rules rather than by the rules of the sun. It's kind of like if you have these kids in a classroom and maybe they step out of the teacher's view and they could make funny faces or do whatever they want. That's not really part of typical classroom daily accepting activity. They actually get to kind of be themselves though. And this kind of speaks in her chart in different areas that she's done concerts and had experiences, and I'll speak to that in a bit. The longitudes are also something that we look at. Even though in her chart, you could see that Uranus and the moon are in opposite houses in the chart, we could see that they're at similar longitudes. Uranus is at 4 degrees and that the moon is at 5 degrees. So we could kind of look at that as a conjunction as well. And we also see that in the chart, the vertex is squaring her sun. And some people say, oh, no, it's a square. Well, it's not always bad. It's opportunity. It's something that maybe she gets that nudge. But it's telling me, too, that it's a little bit easier than the square if we look at the little strip at the bottom where you could see the sun and the vertex anti-vertex are also in close longitude. So the sun is at 21 degrees longitude and the vertex anti-vertex is at 22 degrees longitude. Again, we could kind of read that as a conjunction. Maybe it softens the square. Maybe the square brings friction to that softness. Either way, it's double highlighted now in her chart and in her embodiment, so to speak. So when we're using AstroMapping, what we do is we start to tweak the lines to see really, do they actually fit? And I'll get into why we tweak those lines. Now, this looks really, really messy because this is a mix of both her astrocartography lines and her local space lines. And if I tweaked it 4 minutes more from 11:52 a.m., that moved the sun maybe about another 70 miles, 68 to 70 miles west, which puts it directly over her place of birth in Reading, Pennsylvania. The more direct the hit of the sun, the more powerful it is. But for this presentation, because we did talk about the 11:52 a.m. birth time, I'm going to stick with that to avoid some confusion. Furthermore, it's a 4-minute difference. So that could be just, let's say that we did hit the target here. That could be the difference of when she's born versus when the nurse recorded her time, or just this little flub of numbers there. We're close enough. Again, we are dealing with the sun on the midheaven. So it is going to be a high noon sun, a solar noon sun, and it shining down on where Taylor is and on Taylor. So here's the 11:52 a.m., and this is strictly her ACG map. I like to add the ecliptic on the maps because I like to see declination of the planets. It helps to remind me, for instance, if Moon or Uranus or Mercury, if the declination, was a little bit different than where it should be within the solar plane. And I added the equator in this one, that horizontal line across the map. Here's a general rule. When rectifying charts with astromaps, the general rule with major celebrities is that they are born in proximity to at least one line. Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 3. When we get more than 3 lines, it starts to become very muddled. It becomes kind of hard to define things, but it's not unheard of. In Taylor's case, it happens to be 1 line and the sun. What more appropriate than the sun? And not only the sun, but the sun on the midheaven, the tippy top of the sky. No matter where you are within a far number of miles, it has a large orb. People could see that sun unobstructed from trees, from hills, from mountains, to buildings. It's a visible sun. It's shining on her no matter what. So if you don't see any of those major lines there, we should be tweaking the chart east or west when we're looking at the maps. And also, we have to look at the different planets. And I'm going to explain that. There is an example of Mars on her ascendant that's on one of the rectified charts, and it just doesn't really spell out with her. We also have Taylor's 11:52 a.m. rectified local space map, and this is only her local space because remember how messy it was before. So when we're looking at her local space line in particular, what I'm going to be really kind of pointing to is some of the favorite places just kind of randomly. But one of the places she talked about was Kansas. I noticed that the vertex line went through Kansas and it also went through Kansas City. Now, when we talk about Kansas City, it's in Missouri. It's right on the border of Missouri and Kansas. And there is a Kansas City, Kansas too, but her connection to Kansas City, Missouri is the Kansas City Chiefs football team and her boyfriend on the football team. So if we look at Kansas City, Missouri, we could see her vertex, anti-vertex, and her connection to Kansas City, Missouri is the Kansas City Chiefs football team and her boyfriend, Travis Kelce, that was on that team. It brought, when I talk about portals and vertexes, imagine that. Taylor Swift already had a very large fan base, but this made it even larger. This was a portal to even more fame for her. So we have a list of Taylor's favorite places that she's mentioned. Thank you, Lori, for providing that. Lori provided such a big database. And there was an article where she did talk about her favorite places. Now, she does sing about a lot of different places as well, but I wanted to talk about her and her mentioning these favorite places. Now, one of the things that she mentions is her Tennessee home and especially her bed. And we're going to see the profundity of what it means to not have lines somewhere. It's where you could be yourself. It's where you could rest a little bit easier. It's where you could walk seamlessly without attention being drawn to you for better or for worse. She did mention Kansas as well, Australia. She had great experiences in London where she referred to it as Fundon. And her apartment in New York City. I mean, New York City is a happening place. She's a happening girl. I'm not surprised, but we'll see that in the maps when we look at which lines were there and why that added to some of the fun. She also talked about Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Maine. Maine is interesting because when we get to it, I'll show you why I have a question mark about it. So I'm just randomly going around the world, and I'm not going in order of the list, but she talked about London being Fundum. And look at right above London is her Jupiter ascendant line. Jupiter is the jovial god. It brings laughter, it brings joy, and she's going to have a lot of fun there. It makes a lot of sense. That's her approach to things. And there's also the Mercury and Uranus on her descendant. That Uranus is going to bring a level of spontaneity. And that Mercury is going to bring an element of mobility for her. So probably London, in many ways, she was probably able to kind of sneak around. Maybe there's more places that big celebrities or dignitaries could slip in underground, for instance, with their tube that they could slip through that are not open to the public. And that's what I see maybe with her descendant lines over there. But the Jupiter is really her outgoingness and mixing this all together, spontaneity, mobility, and just fun all together. It makes sense when we look at the 11:52 a.m. chart. Australia was a place, and she has a local spaceline vertex there. And I will talk about that in a little more detail in further slides because she also has the benefit of a Mars line, a Venus line, and even some twilight from her sun ascendant line there. And I'll explain how that sun ascendant line plays a role. Remember, she does have sun on her midheaven. So I'll show that to you when we get to that. What happened to her in Australia, too, is that she was the first US female artist musician from America to really break through in popularity and do a big tour there ever since Madonna. We got that information from Lori, who was so excited when she shared that. She's like, what are her lines down there? And I'll show you more of her lines when we get to the next slides. So here we're talking about her ACG map in particular, and that sun midheaven line at 11:52 a.m. puts it about 70 miles away from Reading, Pennsylvania, where she was born. That's pretty exact. I would say that is within a degree of orb there. That's pretty tight. So we could count this for sure. And if we looked at the vertex AstroCartoGraphy line from Providence, Rhode Island, one of the places she talked about, and it's also within reach of Massachusetts, Boston, Massachusetts, it puts it into about 86 miles, so maybe less than a degree and a half. When I use the 11:56 a.m., it moves that sun line and that vertex about 70 miles over to make it even more exact. So that vertex would be only 86 miles away. I tend to wonder with Rhode Island and Massachusetts if there's some kind of reset, rejuvenation that she tends to get, or some kind of inspiration of ideas for what to do next with her music, her artistry, her presentation, her ideas. But she said she enjoys vacationing there. Maybe it's just the opportunities to connect back to family, which is so important to her, as we saw in her chart. Another fascinating thing with the astrocartography map is in Nashville, she has no astrocartography lines. Now, when we're doing astromapping, the two most famous systems or techniques that we use are astrocartography, which is planets conjunct angles, and local space, which is how those planets are laying out according to where you are on your latitude and longitude. It is literally the view of the sky limited by your horizon. In Nashville, Tennessee, she would be within orb of that sun, but it's going to be a lot less significant there because it's a lot further away. It's a place she could rest. There's not as much attention being put there on her. However, if she wants to turn the magic on, I'm sure she can. We also have to look at natal potential, natal promise in the chart. I put that question mark over Maine because although she has that vertex line, when we go to her local space lines, she has a Pluto local space line going there. And there's a crossing right in the center of Maine. So I'd actually be really curious to see what part of Maine that she really likes. Is it close in the center where the woods are? Maybe she's isolated. She feels some sense of transformation. Or is it more on the coast where those are the more developed parts, the most amount of population that lives in Maine is on the coast. And you get these beautiful Atlantic Ocean views, and there are beautiful lighthouses there. We don't talk to Taylor. We don't know. We haven't had a conversation with her to really get insight or for her to really say what she thinks it is. In Providence and in Massachusetts, she is within orb of that sun. And of course, she is within orb of it, even in Maine. So maybe there is some kind of, sometimes it's like, it's nice to have the energy, but not too much of the energy. Just dial it down a little bit where she'd have some wiggle room to think without the sun really being there. Sometimes it's the absence of light that helps us see the light, like when we have an eclipse and we could see the stars in the sky, or if it's dark outside and we could see the other luminaries in the sky. Now, it's not far away enough, but it's still not a direct hit, and that is going to help that much more with her. So I put that question mark over Maine, and that is her Pluto local space line. So again, we'd have to have a conversation, a dialogue with each other so we could get insight. Overall, like I said, the astrocartography lines are going to be a lot more stronger. They're going to have a whole lot more bang to their buck. Why? Because the astrocartography lines are more external. She doesn't necessarily have control of that energy coming down on her. But with the local space lines, she does have control of what to express. Maybe there's some sense of empowerment there where she's just catching herself on that local space line in Maine to not let base emotions get to her, for instance. I circled Nashville as well to show that she's not really within orb of any of her local space lines in Nashville. And remember, we showed that on her astrocartography map as well. This is a place that she could rest. She did say her bed was her favorite thing. I'm going to bet because she has Jupiter and Moon in the fourth house in the Koch house systems that she has a super lush bed, a very super cushiony, fluffy, like dream state kind of bed. And she gets to look at her awards there, she says. It's on a lake. She gets to do some exercise on the lake. She gets to have what? Her family and friends there. So she gets to do that part of herself, that part of her natal promise without attention from others or light shining on her. That's really nice. And I did point out about Kansas. I was talking about it before, but here it is more blatant there where we could see that the vertex anti-vertex line it goes over Kansas in a nice diagonal fashion. If we look at the state of Kansas, very darling type of people there, more of the people live on the east side of the state than on the west side. So I don't know what part she's talking about that she loved the most, but the profundity of that vertex line going right on the state border on the east side, where you could just, I mean, you're literally, you cross a street and you're in Missouri and you're in the Kansas City side of Missouri, essentially, or the Kansas City, Missouri municipality versus Kansas City, Kansas municipality. But it goes right there. So when we talk about her ACG map and Perron's, I've talked about this so many times about Perron's that it's not active on the whole latitude 24/7. It is just active when you're passing under those lines. And sometimes you could capture the essence of that energy as you're passing under it. One really good example is that as we're passing under crossings and Perron's, we're also passing under each and every single line, because what happens is the natal chart is a snapshot of the sky at the time and location that we're born. But the world continues to turn. The world continues to rotate after we're born. So we could think of it of if you're under the sun, you could get burned if you're not protecting yourself enough. You don't have to worry about getting burned at night. That sun line is going to be on the other side of the earth. The earth is going to be blocking it, but you remember that sunburn. So there might be a psychological imprint, or it just remains on you for the rest of the day, or maybe not. Maybe it's just like, man, I can't wait till the sun comes again and I could continue to work on my tan. But it's all about the way that you know how to use the planets there. These are not accidents once you start to study the astrology of it. But one of the uses of the Perron lines is just to show you the latitude that this would be active on, which is why I drew these blue lines onto the map. When we were talking about vertex, anti-vertex, I circled over an area of South America. And to the very, very left, we could see that the sun is crossing the vertex. Her natal sun is crossing that natal vertex there. She was born in the winter. That's winter in the northern hemisphere. But down there, below the equator, below the Tropic of Cancer, it's summertime. And that summertime sun, remember I said it's a more powerful sun. It's just a stronger sun because it's higher up in the air. It's more of a direct hit. Well, then we could see what latitude that would work on throughout her life. And it goes all the way to Australia. In Australia, we could see her astrocartography lines, her Venus on the IC, but the Mars ascendant. And that's really important because Venus and Mars is attractiveness. And I even circled a little bit of the sun over there. It goes over New Zealand. I would highly recommend her go to New Zealand for vacation. She'll enjoy it very much there. She has a sun ascendant right over it. And she would be able to afford some privacy because it's sun on the ascendant. But maybe some of that twilight is hitting her over there in Australia. So imagine this. She has the power of the vertex. She has the power of that Venus and Mars line. She has some of her sun there and that area over South America and an area over just east of Africa. You could see a lot of crossings there too that she could use the best of if she's passing under those lines while the Earth rotates. What happened when I circled over China? If you've had experiences on one line on an angle, chances are you're going to have experiences on other lines on angles, not all the time, but when you're someone as big as Taylor Swift, that is something that could happen. And she has lines over China, and I saw that it lined Shanghai lined up with that vertex with a crossing that she had way on the other side in the Pacific Ocean. I asked Lori, I said, does she have any stories that are tied to China? And lo and behold, an opportunity opens in China for her, where she's going to be doing a tour starting in Shanghai, of all places. There's no accident here. I tend to believe this is more likely her chart, her birth time. I just added this to show you that, you know, how it looks all together without any extra squiggly wigglies that I add there. So why Taylor's 5:17 a.m. chart doesn't vibe with AstroMapping or AstroCartoGraphy? We'll just look at the AstroCartoGraphy. I say there's an absence of matching lines in key areas. So if we looked at where she was born, we could see over there in Reading, Pennsylvania, Mars ascendant. Does that bring someone to amazing fame? Is she known for being a Lara Croft type of character, or militant, or masculine, or abrasive? No, she's not. So that Mars on the ascendant would show up pretty strongly. We do know a very prominent figure with Mars on the ascendant, and I'm not going to mention a name here, but he is a very big head political figure in America. And you see the abrasiveness, and it's a male, that Mars on the ascendant brings. It just doesn't fit. And then it puts Mars on the midheaven over London. Well, Mars is not known to be fun unless she went there to do exercises and physical fitness and military type of things and competitions. She wasn't there for this. She had fun. She's an artist. She's not, again, she's not Lara Croft doing these kinds of things. So it doesn't really match that whole tangle or braid of lines that she has over Australia, especially on the east coast of Australia. Remember when I was talking in the beginning and I said usually 1 to 3 lines, but when we have so many more lines, it becomes muddled? That's the muddle example I'm trying to show you there. So in conclusion, the 11:52 a.m. chart matches best with rectification, and 11:56 a.m. matches better with astrocartography and supported by local space. However, the 11:52 a.m. chart works especially when we're working with the sun. Now, Lori, I'm going to hand this off to you because you're going to be doing a whole sign analysis. And I did Coke, and I believe Carol did Placidus, but let's look at it from whole signs.
Yeah, I use the whole sign house system, and I thought it would be nice to look at her chart rectification using this system. So those of you out there who use whole sign, you can take a look at it, and it really speaks for itself. When we started this project, I wasn't quite sure, what was going to turn out. But then when I see that the ruler of the ascendant and the midheaven in this chart is Jupiter, and we see Jupiter in the 5th house. So with the Koch system, it was in the 4th house. And I believe that all the different house systems are valid. And I hope that you do as well. That's how we teach at Kepler. We respect all the different house systems. They all have their use and their meaning. And this one, I think, adds to the story when you see the ruler of the ascendant and midheaven in the 5th house of self-expression and creativity, conjunct that moon, no less, which is the masses, and really her being able to share with the world her passion, which is writing songs. There was a quote, and I hope that I get this right, but it was something like somebody had asked her, why do you write so many songs? Or, what is it about songwriting? And she said something along the lines of, I can't not write songs. It's something she's been doing since she was very young and knew what she wanted to do since she was a little kid. And I think that the support of her family is a really key part of her story, because without the support of her parents, when you're a minor, you don't just get to go and do whatever you want, wherever you want. And that the family moved to Nashville to help support her passion, and it worked. It's just an amazing story. I really love her story. But the moon and the masses. So let's bring it back to the astrology. Moon masses conjunct Jupiter. In that conjunction, Jupiter ruling the midheaven and ascendant. I thought, well, do we need to go any further than that? That is the new information coming from the rectified chart. Anybody who has worked with Taylor's chart already knew the position of the other planets. But when we look at it with this specific time as a rectified time, I think this really fits well with what we've seen. What we don't know, we don't know. And if we had more information, it could change the rectified time that was developed through Cindy and Carol. And I also just wanted to just touch on branding. That's what I do. That's my specialty, is branding and marketing. So let's look at Taylor through a Pisces rising lens. Does that fit? Well, we have Taylor is a storyteller. She tells her stories through her songs. She has this amazing stage presence. I've watched a few of her concerts, the Eras Tour, the more recent one, 3 hours, more than 3 hours, I want to say. It was like 3.5 hours. She's telling her own story, because what she does is goes from her first album up until her most recent. And it's not just her singing, it's the scenery, it's all the props that she brings in, and the clothes that she wears, and the way that she is choreographed her music and the background. Truly amazing. We have seen this from other artists. She's not the first, but there's probably a handful of people that can do a show at this level and selling out stadiums internationally, not just in the United States where she's from, but from all over. And she's setting records. And like Cindy mentioned, she set a record in Australia that the person to look at to compare her to is Madonna. And, Madonna was from the 1980s is when Madonna became famous. So it's been a while since somebody has come around at this level. And then we look at the midheaven, and I look at the midheaven as the public brand, and I look at the ascendant as your personal brand. However, when we look at somebody as famous as Taylor Swift, they really do come together. It's really hard to tease apart your personal brand from your public brand. She's a public brand either way. And how does that fit with her? She does come off in her interviews, in her TV shows, when she goes on Ellen or any of those talk shows. She's really easygoing. She kind of has that fun, easygoing type of attitude. And then there's the Pisces, which is, the beauty and the creativity. They just come together so well. And Sun conjunct the midheaven. I mean, this woman shines. Any way possible, she shines. It's just quite beautiful to see her. So that's really all I wanted to present today. I do have this other slide just to kind of show you what I just talked about. What you see circled here, you have the Jupiter moon conjunction in the fifth house. Of course, that Jupiter is ruling the midheaven and the sun, and it's ruling that ascendant. And I think that those are really key parts that support the 11:52 a.m. rectified chart.
Thank you, Lori. One of the things we didn't talk about in the astrocartography, we could go on for hours, but we're keeping it as short as we can, is her relocated ascendants and how that would play a role in her different locations. I think that Pisces ascendant does play a role with showbiz because, people see her according to how they'd like to see her. And she could fit into many different images. I didn't talk about her experiences in South America, but that is something I'd like for you guys to look at in the chart and mention in the comments. She has very profound experiences there. Thank you, Carol. It was a pleasure working with you too on this.
Yeah, you two did an amazing amount of work and really demonstrated how to use rectification, which is really what we wanted to share with you today. I mean, Taylor is a lovely example, but we hope all of you students out there have learned something about rectification, and maybe you never considered using astromapping as one of your tools for rectification, and maybe this opened up some ideas for you. So if you want to learn more, you can find courses at Kepler. And if you want to specifically find Cindy and Carol, I'm going to ask you, where do they find you, Cindy? How do they find you?
They could go to my website, www.theoracles.com, and that's spelled TheAuracles.com.
Excellent. And we'll include a link in the description below. And Carol, how do people find you? Where do they find you?
And totally at Kepler College. You go to the Kepler College store. I'm teaching rectification in this coming spring term. I will teach another class in rectification in the summer term. The one coming up is birth time range within 6 hours. The one in the summer is 24-hour search.
Right. Yeah. So if you want to learn rectification, Carol teaches two different classes. Like she just said, one is when you don't have a time at all, you just have a date and you're looking at 24 hours. And the other is when you have a part of the day, you already have it narrowed down. And then how do you take it from there? So Carol teaches in the spring and the summer. And then Cindy teaches every quarter. She teaches a few different astro mapping classes, and you can go to keplercollege.com to see what's coming up in the term. I teach marketing for astrologers for Kepler College, and I run that in the fall, so you can find me there. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'd love to hear your comments down below, and we will see you in the next episode of Let's Talk Astromapping. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.